we say Bourgogne, we think of Grand Cru, we think inaccessible. I'll never be able to afford that, and that's certainly not my Tuesday night wine. Whereas I guess the future for Bourgogne is for people to understand that there's this whole world of Bourgogne wine at this level that offers a huge amount of enjoyment and refreshment and accessibility and affordability.
Today, we're going to take a closer look at Bourgogne wines with Master of Wine, Andrea Pritzker. I'm Jason.
And I'm Trent, and we're here on an unapologetically unprofessional, unfiltered wine journey. We're saying, Jace.
Our saying is drink more, try more, learn more. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Now, you live and breathe wine. So you're a master of wine. You founded the Wine Intuition in Sydney here. You're also a critic, a judge, educator, consultant.
Wow.
On top of that, you're the ambassador for Bourgogne wines in Australia. So you're the perfect person to teach us all about Bourgogne, particularly the accessible areas and any hidden gems. We're going to go through a range of questions covering that. So I'll hand over to Trent to ask the first question.
So you mentioned the Bourgogne wine ambassador in Australia.
Yes.
What drew you to Bourgogne wines in the first place?
I think everyone who works in the wine industry is absolutely smitten with the wines of Bourgogne. There's something about the transmission of place that Bourgogne offers, that diversity of expression of both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir that is so magical and also mystical. And I think for me, trying to understand the nuances of the region was part of my wine education and my wine journey. And then to become Australia's Bourgogne Wine Ambassador was just the best gig ever. So it's just a real privilege to be able to communicate about the wines of Bourgogne and all of the hidden gems that are out there that people perhaps don't know about.
And I've already learned something. Is it pronounced Bourgogne or Bourgogne?
It's Bourgogne. It's really,
Bourgogne.
it's funny because it's actually the only French wine region that has an anglicized name, Burgundy. And the Bourgogne Wine Board, with obvious reason, would much prefer all of us to start calling it Bourgogne, even though the English wine press still refer to it by its other name. So it's not that hard to say, but I think we're lazy linguists, English people. So we just looked at it and went, oh, I don't know how to say it, but it's just pronounced Bourgogne.
Great. And so that's, I guess, part of the part around what we want to do is demystify Bourgogne and the region and the wines itself. For someone that's very new to the wine journey, as we are, how would you describe the appeal of Bourgogne wines?
I think the appeal lies in the diversity, and very few other places would offer such an amazing amount of diversity of Chardonnay, for example, in such a small geographical area. And that is both magical, but also kind of bewildering. And I think when you're first starting to get into wine and get into Bourgogne, it can seem overwhelming. Like, what do these names mean? And how do you pronounce them? And how am I supposed to tell the difference between one or the other? And I think the more you have a chance to actually taste the wines, to come along to, master classes or just enjoy the wines, in a restaurant, you start to see the little pieces of the mosaic come together. And that's super exciting. But it does take time, and we're impatient people. We want to be across it all at once. I think Bourgogne, you have to take that time to really immerse yourself in them.
Yeah, I feel that, at least for us, were those kind of first few pieces of that mosaic. And one of the ones that's really confusing is the classification system. Like, are you able to explain that to a layman or come into this wine world to better understand that?
Absolutely. The French absolutely adore classification systems for wine regions. And within Bourgogne, it is the most complex, but it is also quite simple in some ways. So they have a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid lies the regional appellations, and that represents basically 53% of the total surface area of Bourgogne. And yet that's probably not what people think about when they're thinking about the wines of Bourgogne. They tend to think about the 1%, which are the Grand Crus, which get all sorts of attention and huge stratospheric pricing at the moment. And everyone kind of gravitates to that very pointy end, when in actual fact, all of the hidden gems, all of the real innovation and excitement, I think, is happening at that regional level, which we'll be talking about and tasting and enjoying today. But above that sits the village level. So these are wines where the vineyards literally surround the village and they take the name of the local village. So people live in those villages. You can get your post and your mail delivered there and everything. But the vineyards themselves will take the name from the local village. Above that, many regions also have a premier cru, which are considered some of the very, very best vineyards that have been cultivated over hundreds of years, always consistently producing excellent quality fruit year in, year out, and therefore excellent quality wine in the bottle. More complexity, more depth, and often more longevity in the wine. And then at the very apex of the pointy end are the Grand Crus, and they're very small vineyards that have been again delimited or kind of outlined and are recognized as producing the very best grapes, the very best wines, and often the wines that have the best cellaring potential. And they get all the attention, but there's hardly any of them. And those wines are amazing, and I've been very fortunate to drink many, many beautiful Grand Crus and Premier Crus. But they're also not the wines you want on a Tuesday night all the time. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as well. You really should be thinking about Bourgogne as this amazing diversity of quality within that hierarchy. Quality already at a very high level, but a lot more innovation and hidden gems to discover at that regional level, which is really fabulous and also accessible for mere mortals like ourselves. So
I'm dying to visit just listening to this, to be honest. You mentioned there that a lot of people think of Bourgogne and just the apex. There's probably a lot of misconceptions around Bourgogne. What are some of the common ones that you want to debunk here on the show?
I think one of the common ones is that you have to start at the top, or you have to try the top to understand Bourgogne. And I would say that's actually not true at all. You'd be much better off starting with the regional appellations, the village appellations, getting your idea about the different styles and nuances of those wines, and then understanding from there where the quality goes at the Premier Cru or the Grand Cru level. There is an obsession, particularly amongst winemakers and Australian wine drinkers, about, kind of, I've had this wine and it's super rare and it's super expensive, and and there's a little bit of the sort of look at me kind of thing going on there. And those wines are extraordinary, but they're also just one example of Bourgogne. So I think, you don't have to start at the top to understand the region. In fact, you're better off starting with the regional level.
Absolutely. I do think there's something about trying to show someone that you've had the best of the best, which does come out.
Yeah, you mentioned that top 1% that everyone kind of focuses on.
Yeah.
But also what excited me is that there's also the ones that you can drink on the Tuesday evening as well.
Yes.
Like, can you elaborate a bit more on that one? Like, what should I be looking for that Tuesday night with my pizza or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those wines, and whether they're at the regional level or sometimes the village level, Chablis, Petit Chablis, for example, those wines offer immediate drinking pleasure. And when you think about the opposite of that with the Grand Crus, you don't want to be drinking those as young wines. They're not really meant for youthful drinking. They're meant to be tucked away in your cellar and opened after 10, 15 years in many cases. And when you drink the top end very young, you actually don't get the full enjoyment of the wine. Whereas when you're drinking, beautiful regional or village level wine, there's an openness of, beautiful fruit aromas and flavors, more accessible, subtle, round texture, and this wonderful synergy with food, which is everything that wine is about, isn't it? It's just that immediate sheer enjoyment factor.
Fantastic.
And in terms of enjoyment, I've been enjoying this aroma that's been coming from the wine in front of us. There is a wine here which I haven't seen before, and I might hold it to the camera. And Andrea, maybe if you could pronounce it for us, that would be fantastic.
So this is a Macon-Vinzelles, and it's from a parcel of vineyards called Le Clos de Grand-Pere, which translates as the walled vineyard of grandfather.
Yeah.
And so it's actually from a very small parcel within this regional appellation. And yeah, a really beautiful example of this regional Macon Plus appellation. And you have this expression of Chardonnay that is unique to this small parcel of land.
Great. I guess you're a wine educator. What are some of the common questions that people kind of ask you about learning more about Bourgogne wines, and also, I guess, the misconceptions around that as well?
Yeah, a lot of the questions I get are about the hierarchy and how that works. And I think some of the misconceptions that perhaps people have before they really get their feet immersed and their mouths immersed in Bourgogne is that, the quality levels are fixed within the hierarchy. So you can make the very best village wine of your life, but you can never call it a Premier Cru, or you can make the best Premier Cru, but you can never call it a Grand Cru, because in the French hierarchy system, it's all about place. And so these ideas of hierarchy are very much linked to a sense of place, a sense of terroir, a delimited area within Bourgogne that produces a specific expression of, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. And so that is probably the one thing that people find difficult to understand, because for us, it's like, if we make the best wine, we're just going to call it, the best wine ever, and we'll call it our Grand Cru wine. But it doesn't work like that in Bourgogne.
Not on the question sheet, but I'm going to ask this. Does that ever change? Is that set in stone, those classifications?
It's a really good question as well. And in fact, it is almost set in stone. It is very, very difficult to petition to have vineyard areas classified upwards. It has happened. It has happened recently in Puy-Fussé, which is in the Mâconnais. They petitioned. It took them over 20 years, and they have to petition this national authority, the INAO, which is this huge bureaucracy in France that kind of makes all the rules for all of the wine growing in France. They had to have this huge dossier of information about, why they had historical reasons, geological reasons, quality reasons, all sorts of reasons why they felt that those particular vineyards should be elevated to Premier Cru. And it kind of ground through the bureaucracy, and eventually they got there, and they have been given Premier Cru status for some of those vineyards. But that is so rare. It takes forever, and it doesn't happen very often. And in actual fact, there is some historical reasons why they got theirs through more than other people, because actually they were kind of overlooked in the first place back when they were creating these appellation hierarchy. So yeah, it's fixed. Yeah.
It's okay to have rules, I guess. Let's give structure to it. Just thinking about this wine again, and you mentioned Macon Plus. What does the plus mean? And is that area, Macon, an example of an affordable region to obtain Bourgogne wines?
Absolutely. So I'll answer that last question first.
Yeah.
So Macon is in the Mâconnais, which is in the southernmost wine region of Bourgogne. It's had this reputation of being a little bit more innovative. There's a little bit more wine being produced in aggregate in this area. There's just more vineyards, more vineyard land. And in the Macon Plus designation, there are a group of 27 different villages that can have their name appended to the word Macon to kind of denote that this comes from a slightly smaller parcel of vineyard land, where there is lower yields and therefore better quality being produced, and just a sense of place, a little bit more of a smaller sense of place compared to just a very large regional designation. And so this particular one is Vinzelles, and that's actually a village within the Macon region, Mâconnais region. So yeah, they can append that name, they can append other names, just depending on where the grapes are coming from within the Mâconnais.
So if it's Macon Plus, you'd see a Macon hyphen.
Hyphen and then a village name.
So if you're looking for good, affordable, but good quality wines, look on for the Macon hyphen.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I think historically, particularly here in Australia, we had this idea that Bourgogne Regional was, good wine, but kind of because you could source fruit from across the entire region of Bourgogne, it may not have had as much sense of place.
Yeah.
And by having an additional kind of delimited village name appended to this, you start to get much more into that notion of place, terroir, that transmission of quality through, actual geographical location.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
intrinsic to Bourgogne.
I'm curious how that translates into the wine itself, that sense of place. Is there any distinct notes about this that you think that absolutely represents that area?
Well, I think you see two things with this wine. First of all, there's a beautiful fragrance to the bouquet. It's not over the top at all. It's quite subtle. And particularly when you have perhaps a Chardonnay from, say, Margaret River in mind or something like that, it's almost the complete opposite in terms of aromas here. Very understated. But things like yellow apple, nashi pear, white peach, and there's just a slight hint of savoriness, something that's not quite fruit in the bouquet. And there's also a floral element as well, which I think is really attractive, and partly this place, and partly I think the vintage 2022, really a warmer year, really having a much more expressive bouquet. And then the palate itself is very, textural, mouth-filling, but there's this line of crisp acidity that's kind of giving that wine a real backbone and a real drive. And that acidity is a signature across all whites in Bourgogne. It's something that they are really, I think, are very lucky to have, you could say. They have the right growing conditions to produce wines with super acid lines that give these wines a lot of vivacity and freshness. And you see that here. But what I like about this particular wine is that it's from a very small place within Macon-Vinzelles. So it's actually from like a walled vineyard, a small parcel of vines. And some of these vines are average age 60 years old now. So they're producing smaller amounts of fruit, but generally more concentrated. And I think you see that on the mid palate and the texture of that wine.
Yeah. You can really get the sense of quality that's coming through with these wines. Next question.
So I always associate French and also Bourgogne with food and wine kind of pairings. Like, let's talk about this wine.
Yep.
And in the context around, you're very much a Sydney cider now.
Yes.
What would you pair with this wine?
So many different things. I think it's so versatile because it is so subtle and understated. So, you can pair this with a lot of our sort of entree style foods, whether that's like a tempura prawn or a little croquette, or you can even go to, to sushi with these. I quite like these with chicken in particular. If you're a chicken eater, I think the classic pairing might be something like chicken with a cream-based sauce, which maybe not the thing for today because it's like 30 degrees out there. But in winter, that's a really lovely pairing. And in summer, I think it's more that fresh seafood pairing that goes really well. So you could be something as simple as pan-fried fish will work with this. But I also really like the sort of, canapé style foods that we often have at functions and things.
So you grab this bottle, go to the Sydney fish markets, grab something from there.
Completely. And we are so lucky to have such amazing fresh seafood in this country and particularly in Sydney. And these wines just show magnificently with both raw fish like sashimi or sushi or, delicately cooked.
I'm thinking like deep fried zucchini flowers or something.
That would work well too. Yeah, I mean, that acid line always works well with something that's got quite a bit of, fat.
Yeah.
I guess you could say. So yeah, I'm a big fan of pairing that kind of thing together. Yeah.
You're both making me very hungry. If we think about the future of Bourgogne wines, how do you see it evolving over the next decade or so to really broaden the audience and attract more people to try their wines?
I think I'm the future is super exciting for Borgougne, and particularly for the regional appellations, because there's two things going on. There's quality is really high at that level, and yet the price is very accessible. And that has been a very untold story, you could say, for Borgougne. We say Borgougne, we think of Grand Cru, we think inaccessible. I'll never be able to afford that, and that's certainly not my Tuesday night wine.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess the future for Borgougne is for people to understand that there's this whole world of Borgougne wine at this level that offers a huge amount of enjoyment and refreshment and accessibility and affordability. And they're very food friendly, so they're going to be appearing on lots of restaurant wine lists, and they won't have that sort of stratospheric, eye-watering price. And that story is a little bit slower to come to Australia compared to other export markets, just because of the tyranny of distance. And it's just taken our importers a few extra years to kind of get on the bandwagon with these wines as well. So historically, our importers in Australia brought in, closer to the top end because that's what they were familiar with and that's what was selling. And they didn't really consider so many of these wines, these regional wines. Now, in the last couple of years, we're really starting to see them enter the Australian market, and then they're getting picked up by, the great restaurants and the retailers, the specialist retailers. And so we're starting to see that story get told, but there's lots more wines to discover. And so I think the future is really in the glass here. This freshness and this accessibility and that entry level, that gateway to the other appellations of Bourgogne, and a way for people to understand the stories and understand the region without, emptying their wallet, which is a good thing.
Yeah, look, affordability and accessibility are the key points that are coming out from the discussion, and it's exciting to see where that's going to go.
I'm going to try and squeeze another one. So you mentioned hidden gems a couple of times. You mentioned there's a bit of a hidden gem. Are there any other appellations that we should be aware of as these hidden gems?
Oh my goodness, yeah. There are so many actually. And it's funny, as part of my mandate as Bourgogne Wine Ambassador, I offer on a sort of quarterly basis a series of master classes which uncover, the hidden gems. So one that's coming up next month is on the wines of Bouzeron, which has got to be one of the best appellation names ever, Bouzeron.
Oh, wow.
And those are wines of Alagoté, which is a totally different grape variety. And again, another untold story. So there's so much to discover. And I love seeing people coming along. They've never even heard of this appellation. They've certainly never tried the wines. And then they come away going, wow, these are fantastic. And often with those master classes, it's almost like crystal ball gazing, because those wines are often not yet available in Australia. So it's like a sneak preview of what's coming up. And then the importers kind of go, oh, wow, okay, people know about this. I'm going to start bringing it into the country and getting it out there in retail and in hospitality. So, yeah.
Things to look out for.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Really cool. Really cool.
Bouzeron.
It's a great
Check
name.
it out, yeah.
And so we're probably at the tail end of the interview. For our viewers and listeners out there, were there any key messages that you wanted to share about Bourgogne wines, the region, anything to look out for?
I think the key message really is that you don't be afraid of Bourgogne. Don't be bamboozled by the mosaic and the complexity of terroirs. Just dive in. Find a wine, whether it's your favorite bottle shop or on a restaurant wine list. Ask about that wine if you've got a sommelier who's very knowledgeable, or a specialist retailer. Ask them some questions. Take it home. Try it with, whether it's pan-fried fish or something maybe a bit more deep fried. And just learn by tasting, and also by looking at the information that the producer can provide you as well. So even if you just are just trying to get your head around it, just sort of looking up where Macon-Vinzelles is, for example, and then, okay, it's in the Maconnais. Oh, okay, it's regional. Okay, and this is a really good producer. And just piece by piece, you start putting the mosaic together.
Yeah,
and it's a lot of fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun to do.
It's a great journey to be on.
It is, yeah. And that it's an accessible journey. I think that's probably the key message, is that there's this whole wealth of wine that is out there now in the marketplace in Australia that's affordable, that's delicious and great quality.
Great. That's a fantastic message. Look, we at the Wind Up, we do like to do this thing called the Wind Up Icebreaker questions. And they're kind of like speed dating questions, very rapid fire.
Yeah.
We thought we'd end it on that note.
Sure.
5 rapid fire questions. I might hand over to Trent.
Okay, most memorable wine.
Such a hard question. I mean, I have so many amazing wine memories. However, I did the Len Evans tutorial a few years ago, and that was a week of the most incredible hedonism. But one of the wines that stood out in that lineup was actually a Madeira from 1922.
Wow.
And so I think when you're tasting wine that's over 100 years old, and it's still not just alive, but glorious and incredibly complex, and I just did not want to have that glass whisked away from my hand. I think I was sort of clutching it right up into the last minute. I think that's an amazing thing to have the opportunity to taste, literally Venice history, and you sort of think about what was happening back then. So yeah, that 1922, I got the empty bottle, I took it home. It's on my desk bookshelf there.
I love that tasting history. Besides this one, when was the last bottle of wine that you had?
Oh my goodness, I had quite a few last evening. I was out with some other wine people. Yeah, a whole host actually. There was a bit of a Spanish theme going, so I did bring a Spanish white wine made from Godello, but there was actually a Coteau Chalonnaise Bourgogne wine from a very good producer, and that stumped us all. We thought it was better quality in terms of its hierarchy than actually the label suggested. It was a terrific wine. So that would be my last Bourgogne wine just a few short hours ago.
Okay, next one. A person passed a present they would love to have a bottle of wine with, and also what bottle would that be?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Look, I'm a big fan of Jancis Robinson. I've actually had the very great privilege of traveling with Jancis in New Zealand a couple of years ago. And I've actually also dined with her and her husband and some other wine trade people in London. So I'd love to have Jancis over at my place perhaps next time. And she's a big white wine drinker as well. She loves Riesling. I also like Riesling. Yeah. So maybe we'd share a great bottle of Riesling, or if we didn't have any, definitely something like a fantastic Chablis, I think.
Must be a daunting task when you go, what bottle do I bring?
Well, it is and it isn't, because I think when you're Jancis Robinson, and you know she's had so many amazing wines, for her it really is something about that's intriguing, that's unusual, that's unique, that kind of captures her interest. And she loves to communicate those stories about the producer and the place as well. So it's not just about being, stratospherically high in quality. It's actually what's quirky, what's interesting, what's new, what's coming up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Favorite grape varietal? You might have answered already.
I think so.
It is a toss-up. It is a toss-up between Chardonnay and Riesling. I sort of alternate on, different days kind of thing. I am a white wine drinker. At one point, I thought it would be the master of white wine because I kept passing that exam a bit more frequently. So, I adore both of those.
Okay. Unique food and wine pairings. Anything to share?
A couple of years ago when we were all in lockdown, the Chablis wine board put on a tasting that we all did at home. We had food sent to our homes, and which was amazing, beautiful food cooked, and paired it with a range of Chablis, Petit Chablis wines. And one of the great pairings in that lineup was some duck breast with Chablis, which I never had really thought about, because you think of Chablis, Petit Chablis, maybe more seafood, more sushi, more light fare, but this was just cooked magnificently, and the pairing just brought out the fruit aromas and flavors in that particular Chablis, and it was a fabulous synergy. So that's still stuck in my mind after a few years. We're going to try it again tonight as well. I think we've got a pairing of Chablis and duck as well.
Yeah. So not duck and Pinot, it's duck and Chablis.
Yeah, exactly. To sort of expand our horizons. Like, it's not just about Pinot Noir, it's also about Chardonnay. And Chardonnay is so versatile, it can actually really stand up to some of those more robust flavors in duck as well.
Very cool. So last one, amateurs coming into this wine journey, what advice would you give them?
Don't be afraid. I mean, I think I spent my entire career as a wine educator just kind of going, wine can be taken at every level. You just need to be open-minded and curious, but don't be afraid to ask questions of everyone that you encounter in the wine world. Wine people are incredibly generous with their time. And, if someone treats you like with a sort of snobbish air, it's probably because they actually don't know what they're talking about. So the people who are really knowledgeable tend to be the most open and accessible. And when you're just starting out on that wine journey, it's about identifying those people, asking questions. If you're into sort of taking courses, sign up for a wine course, come along. You'll tend to meet, lots of like-minded people. You start tasting together, you start learning together. And I think that's been one of the great pleasures of my business, is seeing all of these people who I have taught over the years. They're still getting together and tasting wine, drinking wine, and talking about wine all those years later. So it's a wonderful thing to do.
Fantastic.
And you've been very generous with your time, so really appreciate that. Andrea, thank you for teaching us about Bourgogne, including the pronunciation, but also the key messages around affordability, accessibility. I hope everyone gets to explore that out there. If anyone wants to learn more about Bourgogne, you can go onto the Instagram account, Vins de Bourgogne, and you can find out more there. There's a lot of resources out there that's going to help you out. As we like to say here, drink more, try more, learn more.